This presentation will be about the Canadian model of occupational participation, or CanMOP, and its connection to climate change. The CanMOP came out in May of 2022 and replaces the Canadian model of occupational performance and engagement, the CMOPE, which we learned about. The evidence and resources used in this presentation came from the Canadian Association of Occupational Therapy website and an editorial piece. I'll be going over the model, CanMOP, the approach, and the framework, COTIP, as can be seen on this slide. So first, to start off with the model, CanMOP, the main focus of this model is occupational participation, which refers to having access to, initiating, and sustaining valued occupations within meaningful relationships and context. This definition acknowledges that not everyone has access to occupations and resources due to inequalities. Having occupational participation at the center of the model highlights OT's unique concern, expertise, and contribution. This focus makes it clear that the aim is not to fix the individual or collective, but rather focusing on what the individual or collective needs to do and wants to do. The purpose refers to fulfilling essential needs as defined by the individual or collective. The meaning and the occupation is developed throughout history and through relationships. Occupational participation is prompted through working within the highest context, where that is at the micro, meso, or macro level. Micro context is what is directly interacting with the person or collective, aspects of their health, physical environment, or social context. The meso context refers to policies, structures, and services. Macro context refers to the values, beliefs, and culture. Overall, when looking at what is the issue access to resources, occupations, initiating, or sustaining throughout those contexts? As an OT, our role is to think about what will have the biggest impact to allow for occupational participation, looking at what can be done at the highest context, both in the short term and long term, to promote occupational participation. Moving on to the approach. Collaborative relationship-focused occupational therapy is an approach to OT that focuses on the relational aspects of the therapist's self with the individual or collective who uses OT services. This approach is in comparison to client-centered approach. The relationships in this approach are embedded within the multi-layered historical and contemporary context in which people live and OT occurs. This approach is in response to historical contexts, such as colonization and historical traumas, as well as a response to individualism versus collectivity and structural influences. In this approach, the therapist is recognized as part of the relational context of therapy. This includes considering ways that stigmas, ableism, racism, and additional forms of oppression affect therapy and the relationships with the individual or collective. Overall, it is important to start with yourself and your own biases and how that will impact with creating a relationship with the individual client or collective. Moving on to the framework, COTIP. This framework has three foundational processes, which you can see on the outer part of the circle and the action domains in the inner part of the circle. I will just focus on seeking understanding about context. Again, context refers to history, geography, natural and built environment, social and cultural norms, and power relations. First, the OT must seek an understanding of their own context, which includes implicit and explicit biases, social identities, and consider the practice context. Then seek to understand the context of the individual or collective. Exploration of context can be enhanced by taking a socio-ecological and determinants of health and well-being approach. This framework encourages therapists to consider how the distal determinants, the roots, influence the intermediate, the trunk, and proximal determinants, the leaves. This leads to awareness that barriers to participation in valued occupations are often created and sustained by distal factors and their influence on intermediate factors. As you can see, climate change is identified as a distal determinant of health. As I mentioned in my previous presentation about climate change and OT, the root causes and upstream drivers of climate change and health inequities are often the same, as can be seen in this visual. The health risks and impacts of climate change are not equally or fairly distributed across individuals or collectives. The impacts of climate change on health are significantly moderated by individual or collective vulnerability. As can be seen in this visual, climate change exacerbates existing health and social inequalities. The interventions to address climate change and health inequities are often the same and range from macro efforts such as collective action with colleagues, supervisor, and advocates, to micro or meso efforts such as treatment, rehabilitation, and disaster recovery efforts. Interventions or actions along the entire spectrum are needed to protect and promote health in the era of climate change. I've spent a lot of energy thinking about climate change and advocating how it is relevant to occupational therapy. As occupational therapists, it is within our scope of practice to be advocates for our clients and the collective. If we truly want to help our clients overcome barriers that are preventing them from participating in meaningful occupations, then we must advocate on behalf of and with our clients to dismantle those intermediate and distal determinants. Learning about CanMOP empowered me to continue these actions as it provided me the evidence that it is at the core of occupational therapy and within our scope of practice. Continually learning ways to promote occupational participation in times of adversity will influence how we practice currently and in the future. Here are my references, and thanks for listening.